Hello and welcome back. Here today we'll talk about this new tool. Well, it's not really that new. It's pretty, well, it does things that is great for people who are interested in creating games for the Game Boy. This tool is called GB Studio, and it's a nice free tool online. And they have a website called gbstudio.dev, and they can make pretty decent performing software ROMs that you can port off to your actual hardware device. They have a drag and drop menu. They have ways to make music. You can build your own ROM files and parent different features, and it's a pretty small download size. Even the creator of it actually has a magazine and other indie games available on itch.io. If you've never heard of them, they create independent art assets for game projects. If you just type in Game Boy, you'll see a bunch of nice games that actually run in the browser. And also, people make the games of their own for sale, and they compete in game jams. And you can, there's even games here. We'll just click on this one. This is an example. Someone made a Elder Scrolls game which runs in the browser, and you can load up the ROM cartridge or download it yourself. Probably, it has the regular Game Boy controls. The A, B, and directional pad start and select. You can set them to the menu, and you can actually make some nice looking screenshots for your game projects to show off to people of what you can do on your own free time. Anyway, so you can actually full screen the games using this tool, and you can have your own icons and things you want for your game project to show off to people. It has music and sound effects that you can write yourself or import. I'm just looking at this game as an example. This is my first time actually looking at this game, but you can actually do load game projects. You can actually make platformers. I've seen people make Pokemon style games. This is not. If you're not familiar with Morrowind, Morrowind's from the Elder Scrolls series. I'm not really sure. I look at the controls there. What are the controls? Let me scroll down to the bottom of the page. But anyway, the controls are start, enter, and select. You can actually define your own controls for your game projects on your own. I'm using the what buttons did they say I could use? I wasn't really paying attention to that. Anyway, back to the work. You can make your own art and graphics for your projects. I've designed some of my own arts and graphic projects because I was working on a game of my own. I was trying to make an Alien vs. Predator game because I was trying to make a course on you probably can sign up for whenever it's up available, or when you make games for your Game Boy. So the buttons for your Game Boy, you have an A and a B button. Not really sure this. Anyway, you have this is your heads-up display. You have a player, and then you have objects, and there's enemies you can attack and things. There'll be movement on this one. One button will be the attack button, one will be the shooting button. There's a select and a start button for your. And this game had an options of, there's the Marines, there's the Predators, and there's the Aliens. I think I designed 3 different types of aliens. Maybe I'm not sure if there's 2 types of Predators. If not, I'll add it later. If you want this art graphics package, you can head over to my website and click down on the bottom there. I'm under itch.io's website, and you click here, there's a sprite sheet, AVP sprite sheet thing, and it has some of the things I'm going to have to fix. I'm going to have to fix it later because it's not where it should be, but I just put some stuff out here so you can templatize it, so if you want to play with it or recolor it, I see a lot of people do that. They recolor things because there's a limited amount of sprites that you can actually use or utilize using Game Boy Studio and other tools like that to actually fit things down to the actual ROM size themselves. Some of these images here, they're just duplicates. I just flipped them, right, because that's what you could flip it for a top-down shooter. It's free to have, right, because I made it myself. I drew all the graphics using Paint. I didn't usually use Paint. I used Piskel, Piskel. And they have a website here where you can download all of the, you can make your own animated sprite sheet for your game projects. So there's a lot of retro style games. If you've never played a retro, if you're a lot older than like a lot of people are nowadays, thinking about making 2-dimensional games, or if they're new to making games on their own time, you may want to look at how sprites look. Because a lot of times they just flip the sprite to get left and right, and then they have to change the color palette information because you had a set number of colors that you could only display at once. There's a set number of animations you can actually use. So if you're thinking about making ROMs, this is a nice place to start. Later, whatever you join my other class, I have information on how just to kind of code up your own games for your Game Boy Color and the Game Boy Advance. If I'm not around to doing that right now, it'll be up eventually for you to look up and learn about that from there. But anyway, once you download the tool, you go to their itch.io page. There's actually documentation that goes along with it. We'll take a look at here. Installation information about how to use each one of the features, which I'll kind of go over as I do this daily or whatever day I have often I have time to get around to, because I have other things I'm supposed to be doing in lieu of doing this actual project here. But anyway, it's made by Chris Maltby. Hopefully I'm not murdering his name, but anyway, they update it all the time. They add new features. And we could actually load it up here because it shows that I've talked to you a little bit about before. It has sound effects, as we've saw that people make a lot of indie games or reproductions of games. And so anyway, if you load it, when you download it, we'll go back to the download part. This will show we're not just trying to trick you into doing things, but it's free. You click the download tab here. They'll ask you to donate if people want. Some people donate, but anyway, it's available for all operating systems. Yeah, for Windows and for those people using Linux distributions, and there's Macintosh as well there. And so you download it. Anyway, once you get it downloaded and installed, it'll pop up. And then you can name your projects. You'll put it in some kind of folder, wherever you choose to put it. Anyway, we'll just load up the sample project to show you kind of what's going on with the GB Studio. You can just say you have a game, right? Another thing you can do once you have a game, you can make your own game guides and manuals. And there's actually people out there who create box covers for your games. I've played a lot of free indie games out there that come with their own manuals and box covers and strategy guides and things. Another nice additional way to create additional resources for yourself, especially at home when you can use them to compete in tournaments and game jams and other coding events, because you can actually do some scripting. I'm not sure if it's TypeScript or whatever it comes along with this. And we'll talk more about that as we kind of play around with it. But anyway, we'll just take a look at, we'll run this. And you can actually change your author name to whatever you want it to be. I usually change it to, whatever I go run under on the website thing. But you have actors here. You have sprites. You can actually define paths for, it'll build a ROM that you can actually export. When you click File and I think it's somewhere over here, you can load assets and things. They've changed a lot of this system over each edition has support for loading a different music effects, sound effects. You can actually set up, toggle some of the image attributes and change world tile sets to be used for your projects. You can actually kind of look over some of the more premier features and games out there on the web. Itch.io is a nice website for finding open source projects that people work on. You can actually make your own game repository of resource packages and other things. Some people can, they put their indie games here instead of, or other places like it instead of Steam. Just to make their own way on the thing. There's a lot of projects there. You can actually type in, I need GB Game Boy. I think Game Boy is 2 words. Assets. And there are a lot of good assets out there you can use to start with. I've designed the first ones that actually pop up is the one I made about. I have a Game Boy. I'm Dark Cybernetic, so I made a Dragon Ball Z game asset package here with. This won't fit in memory, but this part will. But this is I made some characters there and some Dragon Balls and some other things. If you're not familiar with Dragon Ball Z, I made some other things to kind of test out, because I make games of my own. I didn't make the game. I just made the assets to go along. I have other assets and things. If you click on the person's link and you click this is the page that has all the things here. I drew some other sprites that for different things if you want to test them out and play around with them for your game projects. But also I make other palettes, like this is another Game Boy Grass style palette here for sprites, or if you can mess around with and use on your own or recolor it as you see fit. I drew them, and you can actually define your colors. And the difference between the Game Boy and the Game Boy Advance is, Game Boy and the Game Boy Color, is that one of them everything was in shades of green, but the Game Boy itself, you have to define a color palette to be used for each particular part of the environment. So as you've noticed, why the players are one color and the images are another color, because you actually have to define that inside your game palette. So I just got some sprites here to show you how that would kind of look if you had a Game Boy and put a Game Boy color game in it, or just swap that. If you had a Game Boy game and put it in your Game Boy Color, it would randomly assign some of those 8 colors or whatever you have, which is the same as the logo. I'm not really sure why this is taking so long to load. But anyway, the red part determines the collision mask for the character. You can actually have scripted trigger events for dialogue boxes. It has some of the support for those touch games where you move the mouse around to explore the environment. I think there's a vampire game like that for PC that they made a while ago. You can actually do some screen scrolling Zelda-style effects there. I've seen people make Metroid-like clones. There's some Castlevania-style early games there. There's some Pokemon, as I've talked to you a little bit about before, that people have made out there. And they actually run, well, I'm not sure why this is taking so long. This is that laptop potato computer I talked to people about. But anyway, it has support for a variety of different things you can actually do. You can actually assign, as we talked about the different color palettes, define your own hue of color palettes as a default attribute. There's a variety of different colors there. It even has a music tool here, but you can assign instruments, and you give them different. There's different audio channels here, or different patterns that you can kind of put in here, and then you can save it and use that for your sound effects or your music. Or those of you who aren't familiar with making chirp tune music or 8-bit music tracks, there's a lot of nice things you can do, because earlier hardware actually had to assemble the music while you were playing the game, and instead of having a track that was stored inside the memory, the program was part of well, at least the audio file itself was actually part of the game emulation. So that would make it smaller, so you could support it. Because the earlier games like Pokemon was written like in assembly. It was part of it could be C, but the other part had to be assembly because you had to store so much data in it. So it kind of goes along with that as well. But spriting, we go to sprites here. Sometimes they have to duplicate different types of the sprite or mirror certain images just to kind of save memory, because there's not that much memory. There's a limitation on memory, and there's actually a limitation on how we store things and devices. This is there's source online that you can actually look at want to know more about how this tool actually works. So if you click on the documentation tab, it'll take you to a website inside the system. I'm not really sure why the compilation of this takes so long. Maybe it's just the laptop. I do a lot of other stuff around on the computer, and then I guess even though there's free space, I'm not really sure why it's loaded. But anyway, it has support with editor and project attributes here. You can there's actually a name for each one of those actual pieces here. There's a they call this side the navigator. There's an editor sidebar. There's world buttons. There are, talked to you before, there's triggers for different events in the game. It actually has a pretty decent manual that kind of comes along with it for free that you can use. Also, information about scripting that you can add if you want to know more about how the variables, and if you want to change up some of the movement speed. You can actually do that for your game when you jump and move your character around the screen. You may want to change the feel of the game by changing it. So there's also a tool online that you can download to learn more about how this game works. It talks a bit about virtual machines and scripting. So those of you who aren't really so familiar with coding, it does do all that without all the coding, and I'm not sure why this is still taking so long. But anyway, it's a free tool out here that outputs ROM. So if you save your projects and finish them, you can actually export it as some kind of ROM that you can load on the web. You can load your game project on the at least one of the emulators out there, the Game Boy or Game Boy Advance style emulators out there on the web. There's a lot of them. And so since it's your own game, you'll have a lot more fun playing around with it. Well, here's the game. It's loading up. So let's take a look at some of the things it can do. It has a splash screen a lot of times, a loading screen. You can start the game by pressing enter. It has music, right? That's great. You can save your game inside of this thing, which is new. That's something you can only do when you had a battery inside of your traditional Game Boy cartridge. All right. I'm not really sure which button I use. Anyway, so the buttons are Z and X as by default. But anyway, you can make a game. I'm using Z and X as the controls for the character. You can jump. You can look at and inspect things. Yeah, I believe you can even, they're doing parallax. So you see parallax scrolling is there. You can enter environments. And as I said before, they can read things. I'm not sure how you get out of this menu. You got to click on one of these buttons here, I believe. Okay. But anyway, you can do, they have scripted events, I believe. You can run into people in the screen. You can actually full screen your game. At least it'll put it, earlier games had to fit inside of, they had a panel that was on both sides of the screen here and there. If you've played any of the early games, they had a screen package because you could run your Game Boy games on your television monitors But anyway, it has a lot of nice, neat functionality. But anyway, I don't know what happened there. But anyway, it also transitions from platformer style game. I'm really bad at stuff. I'm really bad at platformers, maybe because not really sure why I'm bad at platformers, but that's just something. That's one reason why the difficulty levels there. Okay, all right. We're gonna try it again this time. I've died 4 times. All right, you can save your games. You save your progress for your games, and there's also different types of areas and events that kind of go along with this. You can adjust the movement screen and also change the game style. So here they even support transparency, right? So not really transparent. You can put sprite layer packages, right? So the character's walking between these 2 layers, and it's being occluded by the pillars, right? So I can go into the rooms, I can talk to other NPCs. All right, we did that already. But anyway, so I think it's one of these rooms on here has you can actually do other events. I think it's this other room over here. You can slide the blocks too, so that's another thing you can do with the sprite. I think it's this room over this side. I didn't play this every day. This is not something I do all the time. Alright. Well, anyway, so that's Game Boy Studio. In a nutshell, pretty much it does what you hopefully. It has screen effects, and it has other features they've added to it. Some space shooter games. As part of the gameplay package, you can. I'm pretty sure it's a lot of fun. That's probably the problem. Is probably why I never finish anything. You start working on one project and you move on to the others. But anyway, that's Game Boy Studio in a nutshell. So hopefully you will have some fun playing around with it. I'll see you in a later video. We'll try to play around with Game Boy and make something. I have some sprite packages there that you can look at. Takes this off. Anyway, that's cool. But anyway, have some sprite packages you can take a look at. When I was working on Alien vs Predator game, and I have a sprite package for Dragon Ball Z, and then I have a tile set that you can look at. So these are some more Game Boy tile sets for Jungle and other things. I think I misaligned them, but I'll fix them later because it was 16 by 16. It's a Gothic tile set you can take a look at. And then this is just some other start screen, splash screen things, and some of these other sprites that kind of go along with different editors because I make stuff all the time when I have time to, because I'm working on other courses that people ask me about. So I'll see you in a bit.